Tracie, how are you?
Good.
Awesome. You have stuff to actually talk about.
I have a little bit, yeah.
Good.
Just kind of like to rip through it. I know we don't have a
Look,
lot of time.
the phone lines are already lit up.
I know, isn't it
but
crazy?
it's your go. So
okay, well, I'll
just
do it real quickly then. We'll skip the analogies and things, and I'll just give the explanation.
Don't skip
someone had written
anything.
in and asked why a supernatural hypothesis would be any less valid than a natural hypothesis when we're talking about something for which we don't know an explanation.
Isn't that just like saying, why is a magical hypothesis
Yeah.
any less valid than a non-magical one?
Correct, yeah, that's what they're asking. And basically they're saying, wouldn't the fact that you don't know what caused something mean that anything goes, and that anything is as valid as anything else? And yeah, we did address that, I think, with the transcendent dice model at one point, but I'll go ahead and just give the explanation that I gave, because when I gave this explanation, the person actually wrote back and said, thank you, it helped a lot. Mm-hmm. So I was a little surprised. Generally, when people are thinking that a supernatural explanation would be as good as a natural one, you will get an argument even when you explain it. So to hear somebody actually come back and say, that explained it and I understand it now and thank you very much, I was just like, okay, maybe this was a good explanation. So
there
why?
are conversations that end well. I had a little back and forth on Facebook, and at one point I just ended up having to give up, and later on the person wrote back and said, you know what, on reflection, you were right, and it was kind of, and I was like, great, that's awesome.
I'm going to take a guess that maybe that was on my strand. Was that on my thread?
It may have been.
Yeah, and a wink to that person, because you renew my faith in a person's ability to think and reason and to say, wow, I was really vehemently arguing that and I really believed it and I really thought it, and then at the end of the day when I pondered what people were saying to me, I realized, wow, this was not correct.
Yeah, so
and
Terry restored my confidence in reason amongst them.
And that should be a positive shout out. Please don't take that as like a negative shout out. So why supernatural hypothesis would be considered less valid than a natural hypothesis in claims of causation. And the short answer is that things that do not exist cannot be the cause of other things. This is not a claim or a statement that supernature does not exist. It's a statement that asserting, it's not a statement that supernature does not exist. It is a statement asserting that in order for anything, including supernature, to be put forward as a valid cause, that thing must at the very least be existent.
Right.
I mean, it's something that we all agree on. If a thing doesn't exist, it can't be a cause of other things. If it does exist, it can be a cause of other things. It's just merely a baseline.
You could look at it as three categories. There's a pool of things that are known to exist.
Right.
And a pool of things that are known not to exist.
Right.
And some things that might possibly exist. And
But
the
you
ones
can't call them existent yet.
Yes, and the ones that are in this category are by default more reasonable explanations.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the things that are in the category of things that might exist are at this point no different as far as our capacity to gauge them than the things in the non-existent category. I mean, until we can demonstrate their existence, you just can't call them existent. You can just simply say, I think that one day we will demonstrate that this thing exists, but today is not that day, and so for now, we cannot make the assertion in any valid way that the thing exists. Nature is known to exist, and if we wish to posit supernatural explanations, we then compound a problem by putting forward an explanation that then requires a demonstration. So, in other words, to make our supernatural explanation even begin to be valid, we need to find a way to demonstrate that there actually is such a thing as supernature. And we also have to show that it can do what we're claiming it can do. So until we examine supernature, we can't make any valid assertions about what supernature is or what it does in the way that we can about nature. So with nature, we can demonstrate that it does certain things. We can postulate that it does certain things based on what we know about it and what we observe about it. But with supernature, you can't even know what it's doing. You can't make a valid claim of what it does. You can't postulate what it might do because you don't know what it is. You don't have information about it. So there's no way to speculate even. Well, you're speculating, but you're speculating based on nothing, as opposed to when you speculate about what nature might be able to do, you're speculating based on at least a base set of information that you've got. So you know something about it, and you can then make leaps of where it might be able to go based on what you know about it. Where but supernature is just a big black hole. There's no valid means of asserting anything.
And when we've talked about this before, one of the kind of examples I use is that we tend to explain things in terms of other things that we understand,
Sure.
or that are at least reasonably understood. And so if you've got something that is in the category of unknown or not demonstrable or untestable, then you're essentially trying to solve a mystery by appealing to
Sure.
another mystery.
Yeah, and this is that statement. It's just sort of expounding on that. But what I summarized it as is we have an unexplained event X, and we have nature that can be examined to see if it can do what's required to achieve X. Then we have supernature, which we can't examine, we can't demonstrate, and about which we can make no informed claims. So it's literally an unknown variable that we can just call it Y, simply an undefined variable. In this case, if we put supernature forward as the cause, what we're saying is that an effect we can't explain was produced by a cause we know nothing about, and for all we know doesn't even exist. So mysterious event X is caused by unknown, possibly non-existent cause Y. And that's really not saying much.
Yeah.
So saying Y caused X, where X is unexplained and Y is undefined, is not an explanation. And I want to note that piling on more claims about Y is not defining Y. It really isn't. Because when somebody says, well, Y is my God and it's the God of the Bible, and you're just making more claims about Y that are then claims about attributes or causation of the thing that we are unable to examine. So you're just piling on the claims that have the same problem of it requires a demonstration of the existence of the thing in order to verify that what you've just said about it is correct.
Yeah, it's kind of you're complicating the issue, because on the one hand, when you start making claims about the attributes of God or the nature of God, you are attempting to define this in a way that makes it appear to be more explanatory. Like you were saying, you'd have to actually demonstrate those attributes and things.
Right.
So on the one hand, you're making it more and more difficult to make your case while you're attempting to make it easier. And on the other hand, by going through and adding traits to the definition, you are at least making an attempt toward defining something in a way that we may be able to, or we're more able to investigate it. For example, if you talk about a God that specifically answers prayer versus just some abstract God, well, okay, the answering prayer thing is something that's potentially testable.
Sure.
And continues to
Right,
fail.
but when somebody puts forward, like, for example, a definition and they say, well, my God is eternal.
Yes.
That's a useless help. That doesn't define anything for me, because that's just another claim. And for me to accept that your God is eternal, I need to see your God, and I need to look at that and say, does this thing pan out as eternal? I mean, I don't even know what an eternal God would be like, but I assume, since you're throwing out that attribute, that you have some concept of what it means. And so if it has some meaning for you, then we can look at that and try to figure it out. But I don't know how you would demonstrate your God as eternal.
No, yeah, but a lot of those characteristics they add, like eternal, are utterly irrelevant to the point they're trying to make. They might as well say, my God is pink with polka dots.
Right, exactly.
Because whether or not it's pink with polka dots or eternal doesn't really have any effect so far as we can, unless you want to claim that only pink polka dotted gods that are eternal can answer prayers, in which case, okay, let's put that to the test, and first you've got to find a pink polka dotted God.
Well, I think I will just throw in the analogy real quickly,
Sure.
if I can. I wanted to use an example of, like, if you've used the example before of somebody claiming they own a pet, like a cat, and then you go to their house and you're looking for evidence of that pet. There's no litter box, there's no food dish, there's nothing that indicates a cat. Then you start getting more and more suspicious, do they really own a cat? And I said, what if someone told me, I'm so upset my cat ran away, and it's like, I didn't even know you had a cat. Like, you go over there, you're suspicious about the cat story because you have some reason to think maybe there is no cat. You've been over there before, you've never seen a cat, and they're saying my cat ran away. And you go over there and you say, I didn't even know you had a cat. It's like, oh yeah, he mostly stays outside, that's why you've probably never seen him. But if you go in the back, there's this big hole he dug. And you go out back and there's a hole like someone's put in a swimming pool. And you're thinking, wait, you have what kind of cat do you have? Oh, it's just a tabby, just a little tabby. Oh, did you see that oak tree that was knocked down in my front yard? Yeah, I was going to ask about it. Well, yeah, when he was running away, he hit the oak tree and just knocked it down, like splintered it like a toothpick. Okay, well, I know what a cat is.
Yeah.
And they're telling me it's a common cat. It's not some bizarre tiger that tried to climb your oak tree and knock. And so knowing what a cat is, I can examine reach into my head and say, what do I know about cats, their size, their capacity for destruction? Would a cat dig a hole the size of a swimming pool and knock down an oak tree like it was a toothpick? No. So examining what you're claiming as the cause allows me to make a judgment about what you're claiming and come to the conclusion that this can't be correct. But if you tell me that your pet dragon dug that hole and your pet dragon knocked those trees down, well, I might buy into the idea that a large animal could explain knockdown trees, but without some evidence that you have a dragon, I don't know how to assess the claim that you have a dragon and that dragon digs giant holes and ran away and knocked down your oak tree.
Yeah, on the one hand, it is more plausible within the limited definition that we have for dragon that a dragon could knock down a tree and dig a swimming pool hole than a little cat.
Right.
But that doesn't make the explanation any more plausible because there's absolutely no demonstration that any such thing exists.
And let's say that I go into the front yard and I say, these trees are just literally knocked down. Like, this isn't, you can tell it wasn't hit by lightning, it's not burned. And I can see that it wasn't, chainsawed down. There's no clean cut to this thing. And I honestly don't know what would blunt force an oak tree down. It still doesn't convince me that you have a dragon.
Yeah.
And the fact that I can't on the spot explain what happened to your oak tree doesn't convince me that you own a dragon. And it doesn't convince me that your claim of causation of that dragon is correct. And this is part of, I think, what gets me about argument from ignorance, is the idea that if I can't explain those trees, that means your dragon story's true. And it's like, no, it really doesn't.
Yeah.
It really doesn't. It means I have trees that are knocked down, I don't know how it happened, and I have somebody claiming it's something that I'm not even sure exists. And so I have a mystery on my hands, but I'm certainly not looking at that as evidence that a dragon exists.
Yeah, and that's something that comes up quite a bit, even in emails. You've had emails to this effect, and so have I. We've talked about it before in the past. By the way, argument from ignorance, we're not, for clarity, it's not that you're stupid. It's a particular logical fallacy that assumes that an explanation is correct as long as it hasn't been disproved or an alternate explanation hasn't been proved. And we get emails from people saying, well, I understand what you guys are saying and you seem reasonable, but I had this thing happen to me 23 years ago, and can you explain this? No. Can you explain it in any way other than God? I could probably come up with something, but I have no idea what the explanation for that is. I'm not even sure that it happened in the way that you're reporting it, because it's 23 years ago and you were 7 and your memory is not exactly pristine. Some of the things that I've done to 7-year-olds with magic tricks and stuff, they're going to misremember.
Right.
And 23 years later, I walked on water instead of just drinking it. But the fact that we get so many of these where people, they feel justified. It's that old adage about the conclusion is the point where you stopped thinking. You stopped investigating, you stopped looking for other explanations, you gave up and you said, this is just unexplained, I can't come up with anything, but this guy says that it was because of God, and you know what, screw it, that's a good enough explanation for me, so I'm just going to go with it until somebody proves me wrong. And you feel reasonable. You're wrong, you are not in any way being reasonable. What you are doing is ending your frustration at not knowing with a pacifier.
Right. And I wanted to point out, too, that the argument from ignorance, one of the things that interests me about that is the consistent claim that we hear that atheists are arrogant for refusing to accept that it could be the dragon that knocked down the trees. That somehow that's an arrogant statement to say, I just can't accept that a dragon knocked those trees down. I don't know what caused it, but until a dragon becomes part of the bin that includes the existent items, I don't think we can consider it as a cause. If we were going to put the dragon forward as a cause, we need to show that there are such things as dragons, and then we can talk about whether or not a dragon knocked your tree down. But in the face of being called arrogant for that, what I find interesting is that the person that's calling me arrogant is basically saying that if they don't know the answer to something, a God must be responsible for it. that there's no way that they could be personally ignorant, or that they could be, that either mankind or an individual human being could be unaware of how something functions or the explanation for something, and those things must just be eternal mysteries from God, as opposed to things with explanations that we haven't figured out yet or that we don't have an explanation for yet. I see that as extremely arrogant.
Yeah. And I guess we'll save that other bit that we talked about.
Yeah, that's just a small thing. So we've got calls.
For fun.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and start taking calls. As a reminder, after the show is over, we get together for dinner at El Arroyo. We're still working with kind of makeshift CG stuff. So it's actually, if I do this, then you can actually see the Atheist Experience. There's the number at the bottom of the screen. It is a live call-in show. We're happy to take your calls. But if you don't get through on the phone today, you can email tv@atheist-community.org, and that goes to myself, the co-host, and many of the people behind the scenes as well. Obviously, we can't possibly answer all the email that comes in, but we do read them, and we do try to answer quite a lot of them, actually. And we work as a team, so, you know, Tracie will get on a bender one day and answer like 40, and Jen will answer some, and then Jeff and Russell and me and Martin and Jen, and then there's some that are still going to fall through the cracks, but we do appreciate the feedback. And on that note, let's go ahead and take Joey in Tennessee.
Yeah, hi.
How you doing, Joey?
I'm doing good. I really love you guys' show, and I just want to say you two are by far my favorite hosts.
Oh,
to the other guys.
Then it's your day. Thanks a lot.
All right. Well, my question is, I'm an atheist, and I have lots of friends that are Christians. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to, just proselytize to them or be confrontational about, what I believe or what they believe. But every time I, try and talk to them about reason and logic and, trying to find the truth, I just feel like, I just want to bring up the fact that if they're not an extremist or a fundamentalist, basically they're going to hell because, by their definition of, what constitutes heaven or hell. And I find it really hard to, try and talk to them without being confrontational and saying, look, you're working on a Sunday, you should be stoned to death. And I was looking for any advice you could give me about that.
I mean, yeah, I personally don't. I generally only approach conversations like that when people bring them up with me. I don't proactively look for mechanisms to insert what I think about what they're doing. If they were to initiate a conversation with me about their religion, I would oblige that. But it does sound a little confrontational to me. I mean, I wouldn't like, I guess, if I had a religious relative and every time I did something they were inserting their religious views into my life. I would get tired of that pretty quickly. So I don't know if I'm understanding correctly what you're describing, but it almost sounds like that's what you're describing that you're doing.
Yeah, and you can actually, I won't give you the number, obviously, but you could call my mom or some of my other relatives, and you would find out that by and large, I don't ever bring these subjects up. We do the show as a way of informing people, and I will answer tons of email, and I'll run around and speak on it, but it's not like I go door to door, and it's not like I try to accost any of my religious family members or friends. But to the specific point that you're talking about with regard to hell, it's worth noting that especially moderate and liberal Christians, they've got this ability to they've departed from the orthodox views, and they've found a way to rationalize or justify their position within their own mind. Billy Graham, for example, doesn't believe in a literal hell, and has said so, and of course, the more fundamentalist sects have called him out on this, and there's not a single point of doctrine within the Christian religion that isn't contested by one denomination or another, right down to the divinity of Jesus. So it may be the case, you can argue that you know, well, if you're not a fundamentalist by your own beliefs, you're going to hell. But I think it's better to actually talk to them about what they believe and why, and find out what their particular view is on this, because there are plenty of believers out there who don't hold those fundamentalist views and wouldn't say no. You know, I don't think anybody's going to say, according to my beliefs, I'm going to hell. Essentially, you're making an argument from a particular literalist interpretation of some aspects of the Bible, and they're looking at other aspects in a different light. So to me, it's like it's like a conversation that almost has no place, because you are coming in as a non-Christian to tell them that their particular view of Christianity is invalid. And trust me, I completely understand, because I've had go-arounds on the show and an email with liberal Christians, but what I end up trying to do is I want to find out what their views are on the Bible and what the Bible has to say and particular passages. Because if you can point out the explicit contradiction, then you might be making headway. Anything short of that, and you're just an obnoxious ass who is trying to impose your particular view on what they happen to believe.
Another,
and I've been both.
Another thing. Well, the other thing is sometimes people will write to us and say they want to talk to a relative about their religion, and they'll say, "How do I, how do I do this? How do I approach this?" And I just tell them honestly, you ask the person straight up, "Can I talk to you about your religious views?" And if they tell you yes, then you can talk to them, and you can talk to them for as long as they agree to talk to you. But when a person doesn't want to talk about something, you have got to respect that.
Yeah, and it's, I had a back and forth in the past week with a pastor at a church, or actually mostly a fourth, but because some people are either so uncomfortable with their views or are so afraid of confrontation that they were sending anonymous mails. I got it, or Beth got it. I find that, I even quoted the Bible verse in 1 Timothy where, you're supposed to be forthright about and honest and straight up in your defense of Jesus. But if they're looking at another verse, they might be looking at the do unto others verse. And maybe they would prefer that these types of things be handled anonymously. So you've got no way of spinning this to expose their failings, because they've already rationalized their position to the point that it's defensible to them.
Yeah. So it's like you're not presenting you're not presenting their view of it, and you're not even presenting your view of it. You're kind of saying there's people over here that look at it this way that would condemn what you're doing, and I'm pretty sure that they would say that they don't agree with those people.
Yeah, just talk to them about the things that they want to talk to them about. Get some definitions. Try to expose the obvious contradictions, but try and avoid becoming an angel's advocate, I guess, for a different interpretation from theirs. It's fun sometimes, and I realize that I have done exactly this in conversations, but my point is to use that to find out those contradictions, to find out what they do and don't believe, because oftentimes they're not going to tell you, and oftentimes they don't completely understand themselves what they believe.
Well, and the other thing is you will get you should get a feel when you throw something like that out there of how the person takes it.
Yeah.
Like, is this a person who's amenable to that conversation, that they're willing to talk about it and say, well, that's an interesting thing that you're bringing up, here's how I look at it? Or is it somebody that gets annoyed by it? And if it is, I don't think I would keep doing it.
Thanks a lot for you guys' help.
Sure.
All right, thanks, Jay. Appreciate it. We got Jackson in Tennessee as well. It's like Tennessee Day. Are you there? Jackson, you there?
Yeah.
How you doing?
Yeah, it's kind of like Tennessee Day. Actually, we were going to call and talk about the same thing, me and Joey, so it's even a stranger in that sense. But
evidently there's some goings-on in Tennessee, which, by the way, is where the anonymous letter came from, so hey.
No, I don't know anything about any anonymous letters, but I'm in a predicament like he is, except it's a little different because it's not just some person, who on the street you pass and just like, oh, I believe in God, all this stuff. I'm an atheist, and I was a Christian for 22 years, and now I would start a relationship with a woman as a Christian, and she is Christian, and now I've kind of woken up, and I've watched a lot of your shows, and I appreciate you guys doing what you do.
Thanks.
And, you know, it's gotten to that point where it's very hard to live with someone, you know, that is, the basis of their beliefs is just different than yours, you know what I mean? And I just don't, it's so defensive that it's like walking on eggshells around this person. And it's not something that, you know, you want to kind of avoid, but it's something that needs to be discussed. But the person that I'm, you know, with, I love, and I don't want to lose, you know, and I just feel like every time that I want to express myself and my views and what makes sense to me, you know, she gets so defensive, even if it's something small, like pointing out something, like insufficient, like, well, why do you think hell exists, or why, something small, like, you know, and I just don't know how to get past that defensive barrier to where they just react in such a negative way, and it's just there for them, like, I just don't know what I can do.
Well, let me ask this real quick.
Yeah.
Is this a one-way problem? I mean, does she constantly share her beliefs with you?
Well, it's not that she just shares her beliefs. It's the fact that she's very, you know, she goes to church all the time, and her friends kind of look down on our relationship because they say, "Oh, what are you doing with this guy?" Mm-hmm. You know, because he doesn't believe what we believe, and it's, you know, it's very, you know, like, I mean, they're like a full social group or whatever. It's just like, I can't. There's nothing I can do to say to her, hey, this is something that, you know, maybe, you know, I'm not crazy. I'm not, you know, the devil. You know, like, I'm not someone who's trying to say that maybe there no God exists at all. But I am someone that says this doesn't make any sense, and you're relying on just text, and you're, you know, like, they don't even want to open their eyes for 2 seconds to soak in anything because they're so scared. I think that's really what it is, that she's scared that she's going to, you know, be judged, or, you know, it's just the way it is because of the way it is, you know?
That's a powerful thing. I don't know. Did you have...
I was just, how long has this been going on?
Like 4 months.
Okay,
and it's gotten to the point where, you know, it's just like, well, this is what I believe, and, you know, I'm not, you know, like, I'm just not moving. And it just breaks it's just so heartbreaking to me.
What if you could see, like, in a magic 8-ball, that in the future she will never change her attitude? Would you still stay?
Well, you see, I have a son, too. That's not a contradiction. You know, that's another thing, like, oh, I should be raising this way as opposed to this way, you know. You know, love is a funny thing, and you know, you know, you want to ignore stuff like that, but you know, you just don't know how much you can take before you want to have hope, and I don't know. I can't put an answer on that because there's a lot of different things that come onto it.
I guess what I'm asking you is like, if you want to spend the rest of your life with this person, are you willing to accept them exactly as they are right now?
And
can you do that?
I think you know my answer. But that doesn't change the fact that I might have, you know,
sure,
hope of, you know.
Sure,
but,
and the fact that there's a kid in the situation as well is a big deal. And you're going to have, even if you decided to end the relationship, you're going to have a lot of issues with regard to how this kid's raised.
Exactly, because his mother, this isn't his mother, but his mother is that way too.
Well, sure. We've had, on the one hand, I know couples who seem to be doing just fine, where one of them is an atheist and one of them is not. And I know other couples where this has been an absolutely devastating, irrecoverable change. And, you know, I think it's happened for a lot of people after they've been married. I've heard from people who are like, you know, hey, we got married, we were both religious. In some cases, I was a preacher type thing, and now I'm not, and my wife doesn't know. Now I'm not, and my wife knows, or my husband knows, and this is a source of conflict. And what are we going to do? We can't reconcile this. You know, we still love each other. We still want to be with each other, but this is such a big deal. I have no idea. It's kind of on an individual basis of what do you think, is going to make you the happiest? And other people have asked, should I come out? Well, we can't make a determination as to whether somebody else should or shouldn't come out, but the kind of stock answer that we've been giving is, if you're not willing to lose everyone and everything that you love and care about and be ostracized and have your world turned upside down, then don't. But if it's more important for you to live honestly and be appreciated for who you are and what you believe than it is that you maintain the relationships that you have, then do. And if you think, in your case you're already out, obviously you're having these conversations, but the same thing kind of goes for the relationship. And Tracie was absolutely right. If you're convinced that, you can subsist in the relationship the way you are without nothing ever changing, that's what you have to start with as a default. You can't go into a relationship or try to continue a relationship thinking, maybe down the line I'll be able to change this person, because the odds are often slim, but it's not a good foundation for a relationship, the idea that you might be able to change someone else.
There is one other thing I can offer you beyond the just take it or leave it concept, and that is if you, depending on how serious this relationship is, if you're interested in couples counseling, one thing counseling is good for is helping people communicate in ways that are not stressful. So it's very possible that you could go to her and just simply say, this is causing a lot of distress for me, and would you come with me to counseling so that we at least can find a way to communicate with each other, or find a way to put this on a shelf to where it's not going to cause as much of a problem that it's been causing. Because it sounds to me like your frustration is with the communication aspect of it. And it could be that there is a method of correcting the communication to make this more amenable to you, to make it less stressful to be in that situation. But I don't know how you communicate with her. But you could go to counseling, and they could make an assessment as to whether or not you guys could work out a better communication system that would alleviate at least some of the stress that you feel with these differences.
And on the communication front, I've said this before too, but I highly recommend that you don't get married until you've had all of the difficult conversations that you're likely to have, and that you have a good understanding of what the other person's position is, and have arranged some kind of compromise, some sort of agreement about how things are going to be handled. It's just as silly for a theist and an atheist to think, okay, we're going to go ahead and get married because we're in love, without having these conversations, as it is for two theists or two atheists to get married without having conversations about, do you want kids? Do you want more kids? How many kids do you have? How are we going to raise those kids? Hey, what are we going to do when this type of conflict arises? What if one of us drastically changes who we are? All of those, conversations need to happen. As somebody who's getting married,
individual, because I told my dad, and he agrees with everything that I say about the Bible. It's it's immoral. It's all this stuff. But when it comes to the last line of defense, as I like to call it, as in personal experience, it's just that last thing where they're just like, oh well, and again, what makes them so special? I don't know, but I don't want to take up too much of your time here talking about me and my situation. But appreciate your views.
Yeah, that's a tough spot. Good luck to you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks much, Jackson.
Thank you.
As a reminder, I thought that we were going to have Dave Silverman from American Atheist calling in today, and it may be that the lines got bogged down before he got a chance to get in. So, but if not, the American Atheist National Convention is coming up from April 21st through the 24th in Des Moines. Thank you. I still got plenty of stuff to do. I'll be speaking there, and right now I think tentatively it's scheduled, mine's for Sunday afternoon, and Dave asked me the other day what my topic was going to be, and I hadn't actually decided, and so while I'm sitting there wondering what I can type as kind of a placeholder, I told him, I said, just title it Changing Minds, and then as soon as I had said it, a bunch of ideas came in, so I'm going down that route at the convention, where we're going to talk a little bit about changing minds, not only how they change, but actual responses that we've gotten here. And I've had 3 or 4 in the last week from people who have changed their minds. I was a theist, now I'm not, and it's because of, you know, Dawkins, Hitchens, Harris, the Atheist Experience, whatever, and what sort of things actually change people's minds. So we'll talk a little bit about that at the convention. You can visit atheist.org for more information about American Atheists and that convention as well. But all right, we've got in Toronto, Michael, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good.
Thanks for calling.
No problem. I'm actually calling because a friend of mine, an atheist, I myself am a theist, but he's been kind of trying to get me to call in for the last couple weeks and, you know, argue my case for theism, I suppose. So if that's all right with you.
Sure. What kind of a theist are you?
Well, I was raised Catholic around, I don't know, when I was in high school. I kind of went through a period of atheism and kind of just came back to Catholicism, but in probably a more philosophical kind of approach to it rather than sort of like a blind sort of just having been raised that way kind of thing.
Right.
So there was definitely a period where I did quite a bit of questioning. Anyways, what I'd like to do is talk about basically I just wanted to establish maybe a framework under which theism could be thought of as like a reasonable belief for a logically consistent person to hold.
Sure.
So I think that the question obviously is quite a broad question. And I think that before we really get started, we have to talk about what defines a rational belief. And in kind of to just sum it up, basically, I think that we have to, personally myself, I know that most of the atheists I've talked to aren't, but I like to think of myself as kind of like a rationalist in the sense that I use like logical principles rather than, not at the exclusion of, but I think that logic trumps empiricism, which is, I understand, kind of controversial, but I think that if something can be established vis-a-vis the law of non-contradiction, then it is irrefutably true and or not true, and logical axioms having been built up from that and other such laws, I think that the most powerful tool can be used to locate knowledge and belief.
Sure. So you're an advocate of pure reason.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in the sense that, obviously, I don't discount scientific discovery. That would be pretty foolish. But I think that something need not be empirically demonstrable, at least hypothetically, in order to be reasonable, and so long as it can be demonstrated from a principle of reason instead. So,
and you're going to get a slight disagreement there, probably from both of us, and maybe for slightly different reasons. So I'll let Tracie.
Well, I just have a question, really. I mean, I want to just clarify the statement that logic trumps empiricism. If somebody were to convince me logically, like they put forward a logical argument that I agree with, and I say, yes, I believe this is logically true, and then empirically somebody demonstrates the opposite of what I just committed to logically, you would say that the logical conclusion then would trump the empirical evidence that demonstrates that I'm in fact incorrect?
No. What I would actually say is that, what I mean to say is that empiricism is itself based on logical principles rather than logic being based on empirical principles. So from an epistemic point of view, we have something like classical British empiricism rising with, like, say, Hume, but with that, we have this idea that it's built on logical constructs. There's actually an interesting part in his Inquiry on Human Understanding where Hume talks about how the idea of causation itself is really just a customary inference. The idea that when we drop a rock and it falls, we kind of take that in experience, judging by the fact that it happens all the time, that it's going to happen every time. But really, despite the fact that we have various scientific explanations, it's still kind of an inference that we make, and I think it's a valid inference, obviously, but there are still axioms that we have to take in order to validate empiricism, is really what I'm getting at, because there's, of course, the...
well, no, I wouldn't say that there are axioms that we have to accept in order to validate empiricism. I would say empiricism validates itself. Although, given what your answer to Tracie's question, we may actually agree about that. But the show is much, much shorter now. It used to be 90 minutes, and now it's an hour, so there's only like 17 minutes left, and
Sure.
there's a bunch of people. So can you get to like the nuts and bolts of your argument for rational theism?
All right, well, rational theism, I would say you first have to establish rational deism, because, well, you can't do much if you don't have at least deism.
But I would consider deism a subset of theism.
Yeah, I actually would pretty much agree.
So you would have to establish theism in order to justify deism and not the other way around.
Well, yeah, in a sense, yes. But what I mean really is that I don't think you have to prove that a God is interventionist in the sense that theism...
I understand.
Sure.
I understand.
Okay. Anyways, so firstly, I would say that I would give a sort of cosmological argument in line with modern physics understanding of the creation, or the not the creation, but the post-Big Bang state of the universe. Something like as follows. Just a three-premise argument. Things which begin to exist.
Sure, you're talking about the Kalam cosmological argument.
Yeah. More or less.
Which we've actually done a whole show on, and at the wiki that I talked about before, wiki.ironchairs.org, there's a write-up on Kalam as well.
Sure, well, you can, well, in a nutshell, what's your
in a nutshell, this idea, it's been reworked where things that begin to exist, or everything that begins to exist must have a cause, and that's a bit of a cheat because they're later going to define a God as something that didn't begin to exist, which is an attempt to define something into existence. So it's been reworked in order to avoid some of the problems. But the thing is, the premises can't actually be verified, which is, now we're back to the issue that we have about whether or not something whether or not empiricism would trump reason, because and there's a little bit of equivocation between in the argument about universe and also about exist, because we simply don't have a good enough understanding of any point prior to the Big Bang, using Big Bang cosmology, including whether or not it is sensible to talk about before the Big Bang.
Yeah, well, from what I understand of the Big Bang, I don't actually think that it is sensible to talk of before in a temporal sense.
Sure, and if you accept that it doesn't make sense to talk about before in a temporal sense, then you can't say that this is something that began to exist because that's a temporal event.
However, I would say that I think we can understand beginning to exist in first of all, I would say that causality and temporality are only incidentally linked for some...
How can they only be incidentally linked when causality is necessarily temporal? A has to come before B in order for it to be a cause, and
Not
the entire...
necessarily. Actually, there was a rather interesting experiment that was done, I think, in the last couple of decades. Quantum eraser experiments, delayed choice. It actually gives the rather bizarre conclusion that events in the future can actually cause, via quantum superposition,
Yeah, sure,
events in the past.
and I don't remotely accept it, for one, because I don't pretend to understand it or have enough information, but also this is something that I don't accept has been demonstrated sufficiently to make the claim.
Well, I mean, of course, that's certainly you're free to do that, but I would say that the idea that there's really actually a cause, to me, I would define as, in a really brief sense, that without which the effect would not be.
And my general definition is that which is both necessary and sufficient,
Yeah.
and proximal You know, it's...
Of course, it seems intuitively kind of contradictory that something in the future could cause something in the past.
Sure.
I mean, I guess that's the issue with quantum physics in general. It's just quite counterintuitive. But I think that a theist could quite reasonably and completely, because I understand that this is a very seriously undertaken experiment. There's quite a few papers I've read on it, actually, peer-reviewed. So I think that a theist could reasonably say that even if we live in a universe which is closed, and therefore, and then before the universe, there was, before in the sense that it was also the beginning of time,
sure.
Per se. I think that a theist could quite reasonably say that causal priority does not necessarily correspond to temporal priority, and I think that they would be, I don't necessarily say that it would be a convincing argument in itself, but I would say that it's certainly not something which can be simply discarded, because there does exist empirical scientific evidence to rationalize that point of view. I'm not saying that necessarily the acceptance of that experiment implies theism, but I'm saying that a theist...
Well, I'm actually curious about what actually implies theism, because you know, you can make whatever kind of appeals to quantum mechanics that you like to attempt to make something seem more rational, and I realize that I'm making an appeal to, you know, a request for some sort of empirical evidence. But even within the realm of pure reason, I don't see how one can justify claiming that the cause of the universe is best described or best applied to a God.
Yeah, okay,
I mean,
well,
how do you distinguish the God, which would justify the claim of theism? And it doesn't matter to me whether it's, you know, what the specifics of the God are, but how, you know, there is some baggage in the label God, and if you can't distinguish between a God creating universe and magical universe creating pixies, then you've made absolutely no headway.
Well, the way that I would go about that is I would say that when people look at cosmological arguments and they read them and they get to the conclusion and they're like, well, okay, so this argument claims to be implying God, and then they're like, well, it seems that God has been kind of these properties of God have been kind of defined into existence. And I would say that actually that the Kalam itself doesn't prove the existence of God. I think that the Kalam merely proves that the universe has a cause, and I actually think that
I would completely agree that if Kalam were both valid and sound, at most it would demonstrate a cause.
Agreed. Okay.
It would not necessarily be a cause that would be in agreement with theism.
Agreed.
So when I asked for a rational defense of theism, why would you go to an argument that doesn't necessarily lead to theism?
That's the thing. I think that there's a few steps to define theism, because I've argued in the past with people who would actually hold that the universe is not caused, and they would argue this on the basis that, you know, it's the start of time and causality doesn't apply without temporality, and that's another argument in itself, I guess. But I would say that once you accept the notion that the universe has a cause, I think that what we end up dealing with is quite speculative, and in a sense it really comes down to what can we know simply by logic, since we really don't have much empirical knowledge beyond our universe, and I'm not even entirely sure we ever can. I
can kind of shortcut this, and I'm reluctant to do so because I don't want you to think I'm being unnecessarily dismissive, but we're really short on time.
Sure.
And what I would say is that the gap that you're trying to bridge from a cause, which, by the way, I'm not remotely convinced that Kalam is both valid and sound, but getting from that cause to the theism thing is always an argument from ignorance. It is, we can't think of any better explanation than this hypothetical God thing that a lot of people seem to believe in, and therefore that's what I'm going to go with. Unless you can come up with an argument that doesn't make an appeal, that doesn't suffer from that argument from ignorance fallacy, I think we're back at square one, where you haven't made any sort of rational defense of theism.
Well, I mean, I kind of see what you're saying, but at the same time, I think that even if we even if the universe is merely a nested universe within a multiverse, I think that really only sets back the problem one step, because really what we're asking is, we need a cause of the universe. Let's say that our universe, for the sake of argument, is, not a nested universe, because
sure.
It's really the same idea. But
sure, it's the one and only. Ignore the multiverse. Go ahead.
Okay, so let's say that our universe is, comprised of space and time, obviously, and that, we're not going to say it's uncaused for the sake of this. And then we say that, okay, so whatever caused it, we're really left with two alternatives. So it can either be self-caused, or it can be caused by something which is not within its own set. And I would say that, in general, the universe has been understood by physics to not only be within space-time, but actually to be the fabric of space-time itself. Which is to say, as the universe expands, we're actually more and more space-time is being created, not simply we're expanding into more space-time kind of thing. So I would say that whatever created or whatever cause we have to create the universe must either exist in another category of space-time.
Sure, that's a tautology. I mean, we didn't. I don't mean. I really am. We got to kind of rush this a bit. But to say that there's a cause that is external to space-time after that long discussion of what it is a tautology. You can't say anything about it, including whether or not it's intelligent, whether or not it continues to exist, whether or not it would qualify as an agent or a being. There's no reason to think that if there is some kind of God thing that would fit this criteria, that there might also be some sort of physical thing that meets this criteria that exists outside of it.
I don't even think it's logically, sound. I think it's like a contradiction of terms to say that something non-physical could exist outside of space-time.
You might want to rephrase that.
It'd be like...
You might want to rephrase that, because you just said it's logical contradiction to say that something non-physical exists outside...
Sorry, something physical can exist
sure.
outside of space-time.
But I don't see that is necessarily...
Well, I mean, if we define a physical thing as something which has spatial dimensions, and
sure.
Without space-time, you have none.
But you have no way of assessing before the Big Bang. It's one of the reasons. I mean, you want to dismiss, the multiverse theory and nested theories and things.
I'm not dismissing. I understand the multiverse is probable, but I don't think it really
for the sake of this discussion, you wanted to do it. And what I'm saying is that it's the reason that we came to those hypotheticals about multiverses is to discuss these sorts of things. And the multiverse would necessarily be of a physical nature, even though it's external to the universe as we know and understand it. And so we've got at least two propositions, and we can't distinguish between them. And it goes right back to what Tracie was saying at the beginning of the show, and that is you have a potentially naturalistic explanation that is known to exist, or a supernatural explanation that's not known to exist, and something that is natural or supernatural that is known not to exist. And these three are not equally viable as explanations for a phenomenon. That which is known, understood, and demonstrably true is automatically more viable as an explanation than those which are either unknown or not demonstrably true or demonstrably false. And so what you seem to be doing is saying, we need some explanation for the universe, and it should have these particular characteristics. And hey, what do you know? Those are some of the same characteristics that people have proposed about gods. Therefore, that makes this plausible. And that's not true.
Well, I mean, obviously, I would argue it is, but...
Well, did you hear Trace's example earlier about the dragon?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I wasn't catch the end. I was actually
I'll do it.
Call in the whole time.
I'll do it really briefly. Somebody's got a huge hole in their backyard, big enough for a swimming pool, and a tree knocked down in front of their house, and we can find no other explanation, and they claim a dragon did it. The effect is consistent with the explanation for dragons, or the description of dragons that people have given. But the fact that these things occurred and don't have an explanation doesn't mean that a dragon is any more probable.
Well, I think I understand the argument, but I really think it's a false analogy because, I mean...
And I know you do, but we are completely out of time,
yeah,
so
well,
call back another week.
So.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
And I apologize to the other people who didn't get through, but literally there's like 12 seconds left. We're going to El Arroyo after the show. I won't be here next week. Russell will be on, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye. Unrendered. We're unrendered.
Clearly.
Man, that show goes too fast.